Good morning. Welcome to episode 58 of the Driller Newscast, a weekly update on the news and stories impacting the drilling and water industry. I'm your host, Brock Yordy. This week, we're going to meet with Joe Parsons of the Climate Control Group and talk about geothermal and incentives and drillers collaborating and just the complete buy-in, because this week is the New York Geothermal Conference in Albany, New York. But before we jump into this, let's talk safety. For this week's safety topic, we're going to talk about Workers' Memorial Day, which is this Friday, April 28th. And I want you to have a tailgate meeting and just take a moment and think about all of the injuries and fatalities we've seen in the drilling industry and what we've seen in the construction industry, including that 35 to 39 men who died last year in trench fatalities. Here's a statement from the Department of Labor. For most of us, it is a day to remember those who lost their lives on the job and to recommit ourselves to preventing more loss of life. It is also a solemn day for millions of families and loved ones who share a personal pain that only they know and must face every day for the rest of their lives. There's nothing we can do to heal their pain. We can only mourn with them and find strength in knowing their loved ones did not die in vain. It's going to take all of us to do more to prevent loss of life. The average age in the construction industry is 45 to 64 years old. The number one fatality that we see in construction is falls at 36%. Next is struck by at 15% of all fatalities, followed by electrocution at almost 8%, and caught in between at 5%. Beyond that, we have toxic or poor atmospheres, asphyxiation, carbon monoxide, H2S, confined spaces, big piece. Trench fatalities, that gets into caught in between categorization. But we as an industry have to do a better job. And Friday morning, April 28th, let's pause and think about all that's happened. And I want you to think about on social media, and as we see the call for prayers or the GoFundMes that come out in our industry, how did these things happen? Why did I not say stop? What was preventable? We have heat exhaustion and stress that is a new, much more prevalent killer due to extreme weather, along with lightning, along with flooding and other situations. We as an industry have to be smarter and think about how we work and operate safely, eliminating risks every place we can. It's unacceptable, the amount of fatalities we've seen in construction in the last 3 years. The same with in the drilling industry, from raising masts into power lines to suspended loads to getting entangled, amputations. The risks we take with climbing into a poorly constructed trench, the risk we take going into confined spaces and not thinking about it. We have an entirely new workforce coming in. We need 100,000 more workers by 2030 for all water, drilling, wastewater. We have to be able to teach them the right way. Culture starts right now. Friday is a solemn day, but we have great insight, rules, regulations, and sad lessons learned and experiences to show us the right way. Do something with your company with Workmer. with Workers Memorial Day. Be safe out there. For this week's news and feature story, we're going to talk geothermal, because here's the deal. Until January 1st, 2033, there is 30% tax incentives to install ground source geothermal. This week, I'm in Albany, New York at the New York Geothermal Conference with drillers and engineers and manufacturers and all the great people that have shown the state of New York that they will be first in the most geothermal and paving the way for the rest of us because of NYSERDA and New York Geo and Governor Hochul's initiatives for thermal networks and jobs acts. It's time for us to get involved. There's nearly $9 billion from the Department of Energy for states for rebates on top of that, including into non-for-profits, tribal lands, underserved communities. There's so many aspects that diversifying our business right now is more important than ever. So what is our barrier to entry? Why is this so hard? Why has the industry continued to say ground source geothermal is just too expensive because of the drillers? Or all they have is water well rigs, and those aren't the right rigs for geothermal. We've done a poor job of talking about our capabilities and our limitations. And from urban projects to residential homes. And it's easy when somebody's out of water. Mind you, there's only 23 million homes in America that have private water wells. But when they're out of water, a little mud on the grass, driving over the flower bed, whatever we got to do to get that home up and running, not a problem. Geothermal, we have to be surgical. So there's one of the barriers to entry. What does it look like for that rig versus the rig we have? Do I think the solution is small rigs with big air? No. Do I think our solution is to operate alone on job sites to reduce the cost? No. I think the solution is drillers. We all have to sit down and talk with the engineers, the HVAC folks, the residential folks, and explain our capabilities, why we're the most knowledgeable, why we can protect the groundwater in the area, why licensed professionals is important for protecting our groundwater and our surface water, and showing that our investment in our equipment is very important to us and it's our livelihood. Do we need more companies getting into drilling? Absolutely. Do we need to train better? It's going to take more than just the water well drilling community to be able to drill geothermal. But we have to show them that we can mitigate risk, that we can operate efficiently, that we can operate safely. The right rig for an urban environment needs to be a good neighbor, needs to be able to be low decibel levels, needs to be able to handle everything that is the typical riggers without having a football field to come in and turn around in. We're a great industry. It's time to take our tribal knowledge and show them that we can absolutely apply it to engineered specifications. And that the next time we see that heating and cooling company on the same job we're on for new construction or whatever, we come up and we go, hey, who's drilling for you? I'm the expert in my area. I'd love to be drilling for you. I'd like to introduce you to our featured geothermal industry professional that will continue this discussion with us, Joe Parsons, Senior Marketing Sustainability Manager for the Climate Control Group, which also encompasses Climate Master. And we're going to talk about all things that have to do with the Inflation Reduction Act, to barrier of entry, to perception, to how do we get beyond the only way geothermal is good is with incentives. Because he's got some great points. And we don't incentivize water wells. Sure, We got some great money from the United States Department of Agriculture right now to save water wells, to maintain our livelihood. But water wells, depending on east or west of the Mississippi, we know their cost. It's time for us to show the industry that this is our expectations of what it costs for our operations. And we can do this safely, efficiently, and faster and better than trying to reinvent the wheel with some sort of Scandinavian process. That's right, I said it. I hope you enjoy this discussion with Joe. He's got a lot of great insight. Good morning, Joe. I'd love it if you would tell our audience about the involvement in the geo industry you've had and just kind of your background and history.
Sure, absolutely. And first of all, great to be here. Great to be participating in this interview. Yeah, I'm currently with Climate Control Group out of Oklahoma City. Actually been with CCG and Climate Master. I started with Climate Master almost 5 years ago now. So I came in to manage the residential product side of the business, and had an opportunity just a couple of months ago to move over to the parent, to CCG, which really comprises Climate Master and other companies within the organization like Climate Cool, Climate Craft, and IAC. And again, working with this group of companies on the marketing side of the business right now. So really happy to be there. It's a great time to be there, especially with the incentives that were announced in 2020. So a great deal of what I'm doing right now is getting the word out about that and trying to ensure that we as a manufacturer and we as an industry are prepared to move forward with this huge advantage, which is the Inflation Reduction Act of 2022. So a bit about me. My career has really been focused around renewable energy with a primary focus on geothermal for actually a little over 40 years now. So I got involved in the first geothermal systems when I was working with a mechanical contracting company, and went on to leave that organization and move on to working for geothermal manufacturers. Ultimately, leaving Nashville, where the area where I was born, and going to Central Florida, where I was ultimately CEO and president of a company that manufactured geothermal heat pump systems there. After winding that company down over a period of years, we basically landed with Climate Master. So really been focused on this industry throughout. During my tenure, again, for almost 20 years of that time as a manufacturer, I had an opportunity to serve on a lot of industry organizations. So in 2014, I was elected to serve on the board of directors for the GeoExchange organization, and then had the opportunity to chair that organization from 2016 through 2017. So a lot of experience there, and we were kind of in the midst of again, talking about tax credits, about getting those extenders done, which is, we'll talk about that as we go forward. But it's tax credits have been kind of an ongoing scenario basically since 2005 initially when they were first implemented, but we really haven't had the window of opportunity that we have right now. I also had the opportunity to serve on HRI committees, basically chairing the geothermal water source heat pump section of HRI a couple of different times there. And I've been an active ASHRAE member since 1998. So that's kind of my history, what I've done. Again, it's been focused around geothermal really throughout my career.
That is a long time. And as I think of some of the other industry gurus, it's about the same timeline as them all getting involved and us growing. And in 1999, my father's drill company bought a used rotary rig that was from an HVAC company who said, Geothermal's done in Michigan and Indiana. We're out. We're getting rid of this thing. And we've seen these ups and downs. Since we're going to talk incentives and Inflation Reduction Act and whatnot, how long do you think these incentives are going to last this time?
Well, that's a very, very good question. Okay. I feel like, the runway that we have right now through the end of 2034 is realistic. I don't see this, vanishing and going away. There has been discussion, though, as I mentioned earlier, these incentives have tended to continue to be extended over the years. So, do I expect incentives to go beyond that? In a way, I hope not, because the goal of getting this industry to be able to stand on its own has been really the long-term goal throughout. So, but will those incentives creep on beyond those years? There's a good possibility of it. Again, we just now basically receive parity with the solar industry, and the solar industry has always been about lobbying for incentives for that particular industry. So you're kind of joined there now. So I think it's a good opportunity that incentives could be extended, but again, that's not the overall goal, and really not what we're here to talk about today. I think it's this huge runway of opportunity that we have right now, something that we really haven't had before. We did have a period of time where there were several years of incentives, but we just happened to go through a recession during that time. So housing starts basically stopped for a little over 2 years. So we lost a couple of years out of that incentive. Again, it became catch up. Let's push this down the road. Let's continue to add these incentives and go for 1 year, 2 year extenders. But what that has done to this industry, it's created this skepticism around, will that incentive be there? Should I invest as an HVAC contractor, and especially as a drilling contractor? Drilling contractors have such a huge investment in equipment that they really need an understanding of how long these incentives are going to be out there and what that's going to mean, for them and their ability to invest in products to support the industry. And I think it's very important that we understand that in order for really any entity to be involved in this business of geothermal, we need to make it a much simpler process than what we have done over the years. If you look at geothermal as a whole, you're looking at manufacturers who are building product. We do a pretty good job of that. We could do a much better job of that if the market was larger, obviously. You have HVAC contractors who, there have been some who specialized in geothermal and they're very successful at it. But there are others who would like to get into it, but just it's a complicated process because, one, there's special training required. It's not difficult training, but there's special training required. And then there's the connection to the drilling industry. There have been contractors, as you mentioned earlier, who have tried to vertically integrate and do their own drilling. They find that was sometimes very difficult. There have been companies that have been successful at it, but there have been few and far between. So it's a matter of bringing all the pieces together, I think, looking at from having equipment availability, on demand when it's needed, with manufacturers having product readily for access. But I think it's to have a scenario where we have a simple installation, we go through a simple process of selling those systems and not necessarily having a full reliance on HVAC or drillers to sell a system, but having an organization which incorporates use of the incentives that are out there today, use of the financing options that are out there today, to basically get to the point where someone can make a decision to go geothermal, and it's just signing on the dotted line and just getting in line for their installation. Somewhat similar to what the solar industry has done over the years. That, and then having that alignment with drillers out there, and for drillers to be involved, at least in my experience, they're looking for a relatively steady flow of work to keep their drill rigs operational, to keep them busy. They understand fully, how many feet of drilling it's going to take to keep those machines busy, and also how many feet of drilling per year that would allow them to invest in other equipment. So it's a combination of all facets of getting systems installed.
It's interesting. Yes, we have all been conditioned in the drilling industry that the only viability to geothermal, ground source geothermal, has been incentives. As a driller and an advocate, and all the facets that I've worked on, when we're in these discussions, it always comes back to the largest cost to these projects is installing loops. And an interesting point that you made was we lean on these incentives as a crutch, but if we were scaling in the way that the opportunity is there, more systems being built, more manufacturing happening, more acceptance at homes, costs would come down. Not to mention standard systems that have, a given footage that we're going to drill and how we're going to lay these out. And those are some of the things that, as drillers, which much of this audience today listening are drillers, is what does that opportunity look like? And darn it, every time I go to bid one of these, there's some curveball or there's something else that's thrown in there, or availability. There's 23 million households that have private water wells. That is a number that hasn't grown much since 2005. And now we have PFAS and we have other things. We have pipelines taking private water wells away. If I'm a drilling company right now, I'm looking at diversifying an opportunity. And you don't have to have a private water well to put in a geothermal loop field. You can still be hooked to that municipal system. What does that opportunity look like for drillers throughout the country?
Yeah, and in my opinion, it's a very, very, very large opportunity. Not only for those in the water well industry, but those who are looking to branch out into a brand new career, that are looking to get involved with drilling equipment that is affordable and has production rates that can help to support this industry. If you look at the decarbonization efforts, and you look at the individual states who have jumped out to try to put some numbers out there that work for them, some very aggressive goals for 2030 and super aggressive goals that they're planning to hit by 2050. The only way that we hit these numbers are with geothermal heat pumps. Okay. It's just a fact. Obviously, there's been a huge focus around, air source heat pumps and the reliance on electric vehicles, things like that. But if you really drill down into it, these technologies tend to increase the peak demand for electricity. So if you're going in an area where you're replacing fossil fuels, your load in the wintertime, was relatively low when you're, basically your electric usage was running a fan for a gas-fired or oil-fired furnace. Now you're increasing that load for heat pumps, and with air source heat pumps, the need for defrost and things like that, where, geothermal systems are basically your true cold climate heat pump. They can be designed not to need any sort of auxiliary heat. And for example, in New York, their incentives are based around, full load heating demand, where most incentives are based around cooling load. So, they're trying to displace the requirement for electricity. So they require the systems to be sized between 90 and 120%, so that reliance on the auxiliary heat basically goes away. Looking in the right direction, and but with other technology, it would tend to increase that load. So to get there, geothermal is obviously the way to go. I think the sooner we realize this, the sooner this industry begins to, again, stand on its own.
I was lucky enough to get to be on the first phase of the Ball State geothermal project, which at the time, Ball State taking on 3,600 holes over 5 years was a big deal throughout the country. Um, what one thing that wasn't a big deal at that time was extreme weather. From a air source versus ground source, I see a greater opportunity today that we didn't have the predictable measures that we have now, unless the Weather Channel has just gotten really good at scaring the hell out of us. I feel like the Midwest and many places in the country have this crazy roller coaster of weather all the way into early summer.
Yeah. No, it's, to me, geothermal is a great insurance policy for, hedging bets against that, those deviations in weather patterns. It just same thing here. We're in Oklahoma City, and 2 days ago it was overnight, in the low 40s. This afternoon it'll be in the upper 80s. It's just, it's crazy like that. But with the dealing with, the geothermal system, it's basically, extracting heat in the winter and rejecting heat back into the ground in the summer. So, there are ways on commercial projects where you can install additional equipment to ensure that ground temperature basically doesn't deviate hardly at all, and really without impacting very much the cost of the installation. The geothermal system is still designed to meet the annual cooling load, to meet the annual heating load. But there are things that you can do to, kind of mitigate the changes in ground temperature over time. So again, that allows us to do that overall design in a way that's very meaningful for that customer, and they take advantage of, again, the relatively constant temperature, below the surface. So what does that mean, for an air source system? Well, over time, if that load is changing, I mean, that system's output is based on a rating based on the ambient temperature. Cold climate heat pumps, obviously, you can, go down to relatively low temperatures, but when you do, you sacrifice efficiency. And then in the cooling mode, as when your ambient temperature increases dramatically, and it happens a lot sooner within the system, within the season, those are constraints that have to be considered, from a standpoint of system sizing. So you could end up with a system that was designed 10 years ago that just may not keep up, in those times when the ambient temperature is substantially greater than it was before. So again, a lot of unknowns there, but again, kind of hedging the bet, when you're dealing with, temperature on average of, 50 to 55 degrees underground, with a loop system that's sized appropriately, you can pretty much be rest assured that you're going to have the heating and cooling capacity when you need it. The opportunity that I see really for, based around IRA, to me, it's about the overall infrastructure development, for this industry. It's making sure that all the players in this industry, and especially drillers, see the opportunity, and making sure that those who are advocating for this technology do a good job of explaining that opportunity. I don't want to leave that to someone who, I guess, a better way to put it, if I can put together an example of a very strong business case for investment, long-term investment, and again, looking at what's happening over the next couple of years to say this is going to become the norm. As we mentioned earlier, we need geothermal systems to be able to hit those decarbonization goals. It's just a fact of life. So to be able to put that in a scenario where someone can make an intelligent business decision around investing in drilling equipment, for example, as an advocate for geothermal, ensuring that those that are putting incentives out there, even on the state level, are also considering incentives that are relegated to the drilling side of this industry. Right now there's a substantial amount of state incentives out there, but it's still kind of a convoluted process as how those funds get disseminated between everyone who's involved in that system. So, I'm a strong supporter for incentives, based on direct pay to, those companies, end users, HVAC companies, and drilling companies. To me, if I were investing in drilling opportunities, that would give me more confidence than not, to know that those incentives would be, earmarked for me as a drilling company. But also it's a matter of, from a standpoint of involvement of the drillers, and again, I see that as our major obstacle right now, is making sure that we can get the loops in the ground, making sure that we take the opportunity to understand that, a loop can be installed in multiple ways, not necessarily vertically, horizontally. It can be, there are other options out there. If I were starting a geothermal business today that was going to focus on geothermal, I would align myself with drillers. I would basically invest in the overall opportunity so that we make this a simple decision for the customer. We factor in the credits, we factor in the financing that's out there and available for these incentives, and we look at the commercial opportunities as well, to grow this industry. We say we have 10 years, we have 12 years. In my opinion, we can't wait until we're on the downhill slope, heading toward the end of tax credits as we know them right now. That what we do within the next 18 months is critical to the success of this industry, in my opinion. That's kind of the bottom line. It's just connecting the dots. It's focusing on decarbonization goals, beneficial electrification goals, and really not delaying this timeline. Getting it out there, telling the story. Letting those building owners, those commercial building owners, know that those same incentives that are out there for residential installations in some states, are just exponentially greater for commercial buildings. And we're beginning to see that. I think it's just getting the word out. This is not new technology. It's been around for years and years and years, but the story is new. The story is new. The technology is getting better. It's getting more efficient. And again, the business opportunity has never been stronger.
I think that's a great place to wrap up. I thank you for your time today, Joe.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us for episode 58 of the Driller Newscast. Geothermal is here, green energy. It's very important for us to see the values. And again, geothermal leaves the real estate for us to be able to have urban farms and farming and football fields and soccer fields and green spaces and many things. Sure, we need solar, and solar's got a lot of great places to be, but it's not on my farmland or my green space. Get involved, industry. I know many of you are, but at the same time, we can't do every project alone, and scaring many others out of coming into the industry because it's just too much or it's got to be all production isn't the right solution either. So I want you to be safe this week. Take some time, focus on Workers' Memorial Day this Friday, and get involved in geothermal because it's the only way we're going to save our planet and reduce carbon emissions. Thanks, everybody.